I don't think I'll be able to find a home somewhere, but
I realize home is just like always moving. You're always making it.
But, to see much of it as a journey. Sawadee ka, kia ora, and welcome to Our Way Home, a TCK podcast centered around finding home within the people we don't want to live without, and how our post-secondary school journeys went about. I'm Patty, and like you, I'm a student of life with a story to tell. I'm also one of a growing number of TCKs or third culture kids, individuals who as children accompanied our parents into another society and were raised in a third culture made up of the shared commonalities of those living an internationally mobile lifestyle. That description is based on details from the book Third Culture Kids Growing Up Among Worlds, which discusses various definitions and interpretations of the term TCK. My podcast, however, mainly focuses on exploring the stories of those who they themselves identify as and or relate to being a TCK. In this episode, we'll be returning to the conversation I had with Ayumi and Sari, where the both of them and I myself share our lived experiences.
Hi, I'm Ayumi.
Hello, I'm Sari.
And as you know, I'm Patty. Because of our upbringings, when people ask you where you're from, how do you answer? And do you answer differently depending on who's asking?
Okay. Usually, I think because I've been living abroad, and usually the new people that I meet are within a more cosmopolitan places, I usually reply with, my parents are Japanese. I'm ethnically Japanese, but I have French nationality, and then I'm living in the UK. That's like my go-to answer.
Yes, it's like nice how your go-to answer also like addresses the different parts of you. Whereas like, I don't know if you feel satisfied with your own answer when you answer it, because in my case, since, my parents are both Thai, I'm also Thai, so like, ethnically Thai, and I was born in Thailand. It's like I can give a one-word answer, and oftentimes when people ask, I do. But then, like people I know, like they're in a rush or something, or people I'm not as comfortable or close to, I would give the one-word answer. But then I feel like I'm not acknowledging a whole nother part of me that's so important too. But so sometimes I do say like I'm Thai, but I also grew up partly abroad in Malaysia and Egypt. But then, of course, some people who haven't had the experience, they wonder why, but, you grew up in those countries doesn't mean you're from there. Can't you just answer Thai? Which is why sometimes I stick to that. But I feel like I'm not quite satisfied with that answer. Not to say I don't love my country, but I feel there's also more to me. How about you, Ayumi?
Yeah, when I talk to people outside from Japan, I usually just say that I'm Japanese. But when I'm talking to Japanese people, when they say where you're from, they're usually referring to which province are you from. And so I would say Tokyo, but I don't have that much, connection with Tokyo. So I say Tokyo, but I didn't grow up fully in Tokyo. So yeah, I think that's kind of my response.
Oh yeah, well, like when you mentioned that, you made me think true. Like I felt the most Thai in like an international school.
Yeah, that's a good point on. In international schools, there's that sense of like national identity more.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Okay, so before we go on to talk about how we think our upbringing affected, our post-secondary pathways, maybe just talk about for many people, after they finish secondary school, usually that's the first time we get to make big decisions that impact your lives, because before then it's perhaps usually just moving where our parents have. So, and now I'd like you to share perhaps your experiences of how did you go through that process of deciding what to do after secondary school. And, as I believe you've both gone on to, all three of us have gone on to do higher education. Was that kind of pressured as the only path? And this is something we could discuss.
Okay. So in particular international schools, that I don't know if you'd phrase them elitist, but quite, they're roughly you have very few working class children in these schools. I mean, from family and just the expectation, I think generally is higher education degree and then get a job. And there's quite a linear path kind of laid down, I'd say. And I think from a young age, you're surrounded by this narrative. And, in some families, university is not talked about. It's not really this obvious option. So I think that was big. And in secondary school, the school kind of talked about university as if it was a given. And I mean, I don't remember vocational education or that kind, or, even taking gap years being a big thing. I think now the school's starting to change. But so yes, for me, I think it was said and spoken in a way that was a given to go to university.
Yeah, me too. I think a lot of, well, not a lot of, but the high school that I went to was kind of obvious for people to aim for a 4-year degree in Japan. So, I mean, I feel like I wasn't pressured, but there's obviously social pressure to get higher education. So I don't think it's accurate to say that I didn't have any pressure. And in terms of choosing my university, as I said earlier, I was just crazy about getting some kind of education abroad. So I chose a university that offered courses in English, and they also provided chances to study abroad during the 4-year education curriculum. So I chose that university because I could still use English during my degree. And I also remember thinking of studying abroad, but I think I didn't choose that because I still kind of wanted to live with my family at 18. And yeah, I think that's kind of why I decided to go to a college in Japan that offered English courses.
Mm. Cool. Oh, and in my case, because I had struggled so much with like online schooling, I actually never even graduated from online schooling, and I ended up taking like high school equivalency exams instead. I think the pressure was more for myself because at that time I was still comparing like it's not a midlife crisis to think that you're a teenager and already looking at like my past as my glory days. And it was like, I wanted to, redeem myself or be the person I once was, which is, of course not a good mindset to have. So at that time, struggling with online schooling, I was comparing myself to the student I was when I was overseas, and I was an academic high achiever. So I was young and naive and thought, oh, going overseas, I could be like that again. And also, like you said, Sari, and also, and not just from our experiences, but from statistics too, that shows that like many third culture kids, we grow up in these expatriate communities where people are very well educated. And so when the adults you look up to most all have degrees, even though the pressure didn't come from my parents anymore, because I think that at that time they were also very frustrated, not too sure of how to, I think they weren't really familiar with mental health struggles too. And I didn't even know what I was going through was like a mental health crisis. But at that time I saw it was like, oh, the only way to redeem myself is to, go to university and whatnot. And now I'm studying at a polytech in New Zealand, but previously I hadn't even considered polytechnics. I was also quite like obsessed with rankings. It's like, we need to get into the best school I can possibly get into. Even that time I hadn't even completed online high school. So I knew I would have to take like a more twisted route, but I thought like the worse I did then, I feel like, oh, the better the university I need to get into to kind of undo that. And now looking back, it's like how toxic it was to think in such a way that my whole life and my worth is dependent upon my achievements. And I still grapple with that today. But I know even when the pressure, like you said, Ayumi, it's not like direct pressure, but sometimes it's pressure yourself and from observing society. And also like with things like Facebook, I love that it's allowed us to connect. But I remember seeing like many of my friends going to university. I was thinking, I don't want to be the only one without a bachelor's degree. And knowing now, like, we should embrace all our different paths. But at that time, like, no, I was so obsessed with that one path too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I think it's so hard because, I mean, we're born into this world and then all around us. I mean, I remember from my family, it's just like status and degrees and like, it's just success is like this really narrow path and it's not inclusive enough and it doesn't give space for like alternative paths. And I think that it's as like a very toxic way of just like a culture that emphasizes that. But yeah, hopefully it's changing. And yeah.
We'll take this opportunity to talk about the subjects that you chose to study when pursuing higher education. Perhaps we can even link it to how you think your upbringing may have influenced like the subjects you chose.
For me, yeah, definitely growing up abroad influenced my major because, first I went into education because of the high quality education that I received abroad. And I thought if I could like bridge that education with the Japanese system, it could improve the Japanese education system. So I started out in education, but then I kind of realized that it's really difficult to change the education system in Japan. I kind of like realized that it's such a high barrier. So then I kind of switched to gender studies. And I think the reason why I went into gender studies is because it talks about being on the margins of a community and being excluded. And I think that really resonated with my experience coming back to Japan and also living abroad and having like that kind of in-between kind of identity. So yeah, I think it really influenced my major in college.
Yeah. So I also pursued education and I'm still in the education sector. And I think so what stemmed it was that one of my teachers was like, oh, hey, sorry, you're pretty good at explaining things. And I hadn't really put too much thought in what I wanted to be and like what I wanted to do. And that kind of stemmed from it. And I think I've always liked playing pretend teacher. And I don't know if that's necessarily influenced by my kind of global upbringing. But yes, that's the path that I'm on right now.
I think like all three of us, like, see, well, I remember we hadn't talked for perhaps like over a decade at one point, and like the next time we talked, and that it was that point I found out that like two of my closest friends are also passionate about education, and it was just like, oh wow, this is destiny. Like you're supposed to be. Look at us, our paths converging. I'm not studying education at the moment, but when I asked to go abroad, actually, and then this was my reason. I was thinking, okay, I gravitated towards primary education. I think on perhaps like the more positive side, it's because, I grew up with, blessed with very amazing teachers. But then I think a part of it, the selfish side, is that I only felt the place I felt the most sense of belonging was at, the schools I attended, like especially the ones abroad. And maybe it's the desire that this could be my ticket back. But then perhaps more than that, like not just my ticket back abroad, I was also struggling very much in Thailand. But then I also knew that my parents, they no longer wanted to move anymore. They wanted to settle there. And I think my brother, like he feels a greater sense of belonging in Thailand than me, and shows that, if siblings can experience things differently. So he's studying here now, but I don't know whether he wants to, like return to live in Thailand permanently. And I'm unsure myself, but I thought, okay, maybe the one way that I can feel a greater sense of belonging in Thailand is if I teach at an international school there. I thought like maybe if I still don't feel like I belong in the local community, but at least I would be like straddling two communities. I'd have the international school community if I feel a greater sense of belonging there. So like some people, study abroad in hopes of traveling and whatnot. But something that I don't think I've discussed before really with other people until like coming into this course and starting this project, is I realized that, oh, actually, like me wanting to go abroad was the seeing that maybe that's one way for me to stay in Thailand and be happier there. And of course, there's that thing where, international schools are private schools. And there's the whole thing where, do you want to teach at public or private schools and all those complexities? But for me, it was just a very selfish part of, I felt like I belong in the international school community and wanted to teach there. But then, of course, my journey with all the road bumps and all, like I never quite made it to teacher's college. Not yet. So instead of perhaps waiting to take the SAT in Thailand, that could have allowed me to go directly into the bachelor's of teaching. I was so desperate to go abroad, I agreed to taking the foundation program without properly researching. So advice I give to any younger audience members listening now is like, do your research. I didn't stop to consider about whether I would suit the foundation program. And when it was more general subjects, not subjects that I enjoyed, it's more exam based, I really struggled with my anxiety. So I withdrew from that, ended up taking like a short course here and there, ended up doing a culinary arts degree, even though I'm probably still one of the people who are least confident about cooking. Like I can't believe some of the things I was able to create in my course. I would like need a couple of months to practice. I enrolled in that course. I was about to say the wrong reason, although I don't regret the experience since I loved my teachers so much. But at that time, I was still so dead set on wanting to go to teacher's college, and I knew they offered a master's program. And to get into the master's of primary education, you can get any degree. So I was thinking culinary arts, I saw it as a stepping stone. For me, a great learning point was perhaps more so than learning food design, with learning from my teachers and seeing them teach, and to see that, as lacking in confidence I was with food, if you have teachers who are supportive and make you feel safe, I can still not only like survive the course, but even thrive in some moments too. And this is like rekindled my desire to go into education. Yeah, my story is kind of like long-winded, but yeah, that's me. So we've talked about academics. How about with regards to things like social lives or relationships or friendships? Do you find that you gravitate or are able to bond better with those who share an international background, or is that not so much of a factor?
I'd say, so I think when I was in international schools, it really is like a bubble because you're just like with these people who are international school. But then I think going away from that, because for university, I went to just like a public UK university, and you meet people from all walks of life. And I think I realized that because back in an international school, it wasn't as if I was best friends with everybody, and there were definitely still cliques, and, you know, not everyone is open-minded. So I realized, I think, yes, generally international school children do tend to be more open-minded, or kind of, they have this kind of cosmopolitan sense. But then you can find people like that aren't from international schools. Like my closest friend, she's French, but she's like super, super kind and friendly and open-minded. So yes, that's what I'd say. So not just with international school children.
Yeah, me too. I feel like I have friends that have an international background and those who don't. And for me, I think I do realize that I'm kind of like changing the side that I show when I'm with different types of people. And I used to kind of struggle with that. I thought I was lying to like a part of my friends, but now I've accepted that, you know, both sides are myself. And yeah, and I'm glad that I have friends that have various backgrounds.
Mm-hmm. I can relate to having perhaps like different versions. And in a way, like also like you, I do feel sometimes like as if I'm lying, but sometimes it's like, it's just a version of you that's more comfortable, you know, in a certain place. And I suppose as long as you're being true to yourself, but maybe a different version, perhaps that's still okay too. Yeah, in my case, like before I did, like looking back, I saw like the factors of, oh, my closest friends, you know, they're from international backgrounds. But the key thing that you mentioned, Sari, is like, it's that openness. And perhaps, it might be like, you know, a little harder to find people who are open in general. But it's like, once you get to know them, you realize that, oh, actually background isn't an issue at all. It's more about openness and kindness and compassion. These things matter more. So it's like taking the effort to try to find people who click with you, you know, and even if they don't click with you, just to be able to show kindness to each other, and you can still eventually form a strong bond with them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, this one's like specifically for you, because I want, you did get a chance to talk about in your advocacy work, like, you know, Sari, if you'd like to share and perhaps like introduce it so that an audience who doesn't know what this means can like know what it's all about.
Thank you. So I started this online petition campaign to cut down the tax rate of menstrual products in Japan. And we also work to dismantle all kinds of inequality related to menstruation. So we're also working on issues related to menopause or menstrual education and all kinds of things like that. And yeah, that's what I do nowadays the most, yeah.
And like, you know how earlier we were talking about like belonging and not feeling like we belong, you know, in certain groups of people. Have you found a sense of belonging with the people you do your advocacy work with?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think people come into advocacy a lot of people have this experience of being excluded or like being discriminated, and that's kind of the reason why they come into advocacy work. So yeah, it's definitely a big part of me that, you know, like living abroad really influenced my work in advocacy, and also like being able to connect with activists all around the world because of my background. That's a really big advantage for me.
Thanks for sharing. Okay. So in your case, Sari, like, I don't know if it was explicitly mentioned that yet, but you're a school teacher, and what year group do you teach?
So in the UK, it's called early years, but they are roughly 4 to 5 years old, so they're very young.
And I have like such great admiration for teachers or people passionate about education, and like, and so in your case, how has that experience been, like teaching, and also do you like feel a sense of belonging in the school where you teach and with your students?
Yes. I'd say, so I trained outside of London, but I think I wanted to go back to London because it does have a more cosmopolitan vibe and you have people from all backgrounds. And so the particular school that I teach in, most of the families are Bengali or Somali, second, third generation families. And the staff as well are from different backgrounds. You've got male teachers, all kinds of genders of all kinds of nationalities, you know, all languages. And that really drew me to the school. And it's kind of like an international school in some ways, but it's like a public school, and it is like national UK curriculum. But I've definitely found a sense of belonging there just because the people, again, it goes back to the openness, and they're just super friendly and welcoming. But I'd say this was also university experience as well, but coming to the UK was my first time experiencing like state laws and policies, if that makes sense. Because, I mean, also because I was young, but I was like in international schools. I don't really know about national things. And I'm familiar with the news, but I'm not familiar with how things work on the national level. And so that's been cool because I learned about that through my degree as well, but learning about how things work on a state level, that makes sense. But yeah, so I have found a sense of belonging in school though.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and to be able to learn that through actually experiencing it, like, being on the ground teaching and knowing how like the policies actually affect you and the school.
Oh yes, definitely. And as you mentioned as well, in the UK as well, it is very hard, and these state policies are very hard to loosen up and to become less restraining, let's say.
Oh, I think we'll revisit the topic of post-secondary education, just in case we can give some advice to younger people who've not yet come to this stage. So perhaps is there any piece of advice you'd like to give, and or you can share advice that you received that you found really helpful, or perhaps something that you learned through experiencing it yourself and want to share as advice?
Well, for me, coming back to Japan was a big struggle. And yeah, I wish I knew that it's okay to struggle. A lot of the people that I met, they only talked about the good things and how they were doing great in their new community. So I think I would tell my younger self that it's okay to feel like you don't belong or that you're struggling with the language, and you might not get over it. That's still okay too. Yeah, that's my advice.
So advice, this is more practical, but I think it goes back to what you said, Patty, of the research, but also just the time, and again, to struggling as well, but just give yourself the time to pause and sit with things and just not get too caught up in I need to be doing this, and because you have so many expectations and things being told, and and I think people don't have the time to just breathe and actually think and reflect what actually do I want to be doing, and what is it that I'm struggling in, and what is it that I love and want to be doing. And I think I know more people are taking gap years if that is financially possible. But in whatever way, just taking the time to think about where you find your joy and your passions. And then from there, more than practically thinking, okay, what do I need? Is it possible? Is it financially possible and things? And a more specific resource that I recommend. So in the UK, there's this site called Job Prospects UK. And they have these really useful things where you can search different jobs. So let's say you click teacher, and then it gives you roughly what qualifications and things you need, what a day in the life of that job is. And then at the end, it gives you related jobs. And that I would have liked, because I think I was really focused on okay, teaching, education, but to be able to then know what related fields are. And that would have been, I think, really cool, just so that I had, a wider horizon to be aware of.
That's good. And what you both shared is very helpful. And perhaps for me, touching on that is, really getting it, perhaps our best resources. Of course, there's lots of great online resources, but sometimes what we share online is, oftentimes successes, and how meaningful it can be to actually talk to people in person, whether they're still attending higher education or they've graduated, or, people much older, just people from different walks of life, sitting down, having a talk with them. And then you realize these people who may had lives that you thought were super perfect, or you thought they had linear pathways, and they some people are really open and they're willing to be vulnerable with you. And when they share their struggles, it's so comforting to know that you're not alone. And sometimes, they're not bloggers or whatnot, so these stories may not be published online, but to think that there's so many people around us. And sometimes I know when I was doing research, I was mostly just, resorting to the computer, not realizing all the amazing people around me and what they have to offer, regardless of their past too. Or if perhaps if you know someone in a career that you think you'd get a chance to talk to them, maybe get to shadow them, see how their workday is or even if you don't get to follow them to their workplace, to have them what you said, Sari, run through their day. And say, if you can't find people, then online resources are helpful too. But just in case you meet people in person, don't discount that. Or say through video call or whatnot during this time, if not in person. Mm-hmm. Okay, so maybe a last one for the podcast is, we touched on this a bit before, but with regards to perhaps looking forwards, of course, it's hard to plan things, and even harder now in this day and age. But do you think you'd likely settle someplace or want to continue moving around?
Okay, because I have been moving around for quite a bit. And I think I do seek that sense of physical rootedness at least. So I've never lived in Japan, so that is my short-term goal, or what I want to do is go back and really just get to know a place. And I'm really interested in community work. And I think it takes time. I think our world is so fast paced and there's like so much movement and rapid mobility. And I think there's so much beauty and importance in like slowing down and just like being rooted in somewhere. But that doesn't mean to say, and it goes back to the question of like, what is home and like, where is it? And you're what you both mentioned about like the grass is green on the other side, or even if you're somewhere home, like it's always like you're always thinking it's ahead or somewhere else. And I think I've come to realize even if I go to Japan, I won't suddenly feel as if I'm rooted and I'm home. Like I realize home is just like always moving. You're always making it. And I'm trying to like realize that that's okay and that you can find contentment in that. And it's nice actually that it's not this fixed thing, because then you're always learning. And even when I'm in Japan, I'll continue to learn and meet new people and yeah. But yes, for now I do want to go back to Japan, I think.
That's like a beautiful explanation. And, like, honestly, that's like the thing that perhaps should be applied with other terms too, whether with success or whatnot. It should be this fixed thing where there's only like one path or defined in one way, but, to see much of it as a journey too. Mm-hmm.
A journey, yeah.
How about your case, Ayumi?
I think it's the opposite. I'm sorry, because you've been moving around for a long time, but for me, I've settled in Japan for more than 10 years now. So now I feel like I'm ready to kind of explore the world again. So hopefully the COVID situation gets better so I can move around a bit. And yeah, I don't think I'll be able to find a home somewhere, but yeah, I hope I can kind of explore and kind of reflect on myself.
Cool. Yeah, there are definitely like advantages and disadvantages to whether, settling down or continuing moving. I think for me, like much more like you earlier, Ayumi, especially during my teenage years in Thailand, I had that desire to go abroad multiple places. But so in 2020, before the pandemic got bad, I got a chance. I was going on this trip with some other students from New Zealand, and we were going to multiple countries in a month. And while I enjoyed the trip, I realized the highlights from like that trip was the people, whether it's the people I was journeying with, and like I got to meet you, Ayumi, and that was not planned. Like we were texting each other, like I'm about to arrive in Japan. Right. And then you were like, you're on the train to come there. And my friends, like when they saw it, they said it was like a movie scene.
I love that. Oh, that's beautiful.
Because at first we were thinking, okay, it might not happen, like, because I might be leaving the airport before you arrived, but there was just a sliver of hope. And when I actually saw you, it was just like, we didn't even plan this to think that. And then we just like, it was like a movie, but of course no one like caught when we were like running to hug, but it was so unexpected. And for me, like, that was the highlight of the trip. And also on that same trip, I got to see our fourth grade teacher, Sari, because you and I were lucky enough to be in the same class during my entire time in Malaysia. But it was like the relationships there. And for me, after that trip ended, so when I came back to reflect, I realized, true, as the countries have so much to offer, but it's the people that made it. And now, so it's like for me saying, okay, regardless of whether I stay in New Zealand or I go back to Thailand or whatnot, like it's the relationships that count. And maybe if, of course, like we're not even here in person with each other, but pretend if I know now if I'm in Thailand, I don't have to shut myself in and be so alone if I'm struggling. I can reach out to my friends, and maybe that would have made the difference. Where I struggled so much in Thailand because when I was struggling and I thought I was alone, I didn't reach out whether to my friends abroad or even, people in Thailand too. It's just when you're hiding so much, then of course, like you're going to struggle because you're just keeping it inside and just like opening up and like to realize like, oh, all the relationships I can make and rekindle with my friends overseas and people like in my own home country too, or in New Zealand or wherever. Yeah. So, hopefully when, the world like borders open up wherever, we three will get to meet in person. And yes, fingers crossed. I really look forward to that.
It'll be like a proper movie scene as all of it. We're like running from
I'll cue some epic music.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, this may be the 5th and final podcast episode I'm releasing as part of my design honors project, but let this not be the end. I might record and release more episodes in the future. However, even if I don't return to podcasting, I will continue to have many more conversations centered around finding home within, the people we don't want to live without, and how our post-secondary school journeys went about, amongst other topics. So I invite you to join me, whether or not you identify as a TCK. Let's share our own stories and take the time to listen to the stories of those around us. If you want to reach out to me, you can still reach me through this podcast's social media accounts as listed in the show notes. As always, take care and thank you. Your support means the world. This has been Our Way Home, a TCK podcast.